What if the person who hated you the most wasn't an enemy, but your own father-in-law? He wasn't angry because I hurt his daughter, he was furious because I loved her better than he ever did. Before continue, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. That's free and only way to support us. Thank you. My name is Daniel, and I'm 30 years old. I never thought love could make someone hate me, but it did, just not in the way you'd expect. It wasn't an enemy, a rival, or some jealous ex. It was my own father-in-law. The first time I met him, I thought he was the kind of man who had everything under control. Strong handshake, firm voice, eyes that scanned you like he was deciding if you were worth the air you breathed. He had that aura of authority, the kind that makes waiters bow and neighbors whisper. I thought it was respect. Later, I realized it was fear mixed with habit. I had no idea at that moment that loving his daughter better than he ever did would turn me into his greatest enemy. See, I fell in love with his daughter for reasons that were simple and real. She laughed like she actually meant it. She cared about little things like feeding stray cats and making tea for anyone who visited. She wasn't interested in shiny gifts or fake promises. She just wanted to be loved, fully, without conditions. And I gave her that. I didn't give her diamonds or a castle, but I gave her loyalty, attention, and the kind of comfort money can't buy. At first, he smiled at me. He welcomed me in with polite gestures, patted my back during family dinners, asked the standard questions about my job, my plans, my salary. His smile, though, it always looked tight, like it had been nailed to his face. I didn't notice back then. I was blinded by love. But his smile was never kindness. It was calculation. Things shifted after we married. Slowly, like clouds drifting before a storm. He began making little comments. Sometimes about how his daughter looked happier than ever, other times about how maybe I was spoiling her too much. At first, I thought he was joking. I even laughed. But his eyes never laughed with me. They just stayed sharp, like knives resting on a table, waiting to be picked up. I didn't realize then what was growing inside him. Jealousy. Not because I had taken something from him, but because I was giving his daughter something he never could: gentleness, patience, respect. He had raised her in a house full of rules, punishments, and silence. Then I came along with open arms, with laughter, with understanding. To her, I was freedom. To him, I was a mirror reflecting every way he had failed. And nothing eats a man alive faster than his own reflection. The first real crack showed during a family dinner. He sat at the head of the table, as always, carving meat like a king dividing land among peasants. His daughter, my wife, was glowing that evening. She kept smiling at me across the table, little looks that said more than words. She laughed at my silly jokes, leaned her shoulder into mine when we talked, and even playfully fed me a piece of bread. I thought it was harmless. I thought love should be celebrated. But his face tightened like a knot being pulled too hard. He cleared his throat louder than necessary, cut his meat harder than necessary, and suddenly asked me about my salary in front of everyone. The room went quiet. His question wasn't curiosity. It was an attack, wrapped in casual words. I answered calmly, but I could feel the weight behind it. He wanted to humiliate me. He wanted to remind me that no matter how much love I gave his daughter, money was still the measure of a man in his eyes. My wife broke the tension by changing the subject, but I caught his glare. It wasn't just disapproval. It was rivalry. A father competing with a man who had taken his daughter's heart. From then on, the little cracks spread faster. He criticized how I held my wife's hand in public, called it childish. He rolled his eyes when she defended me. He scoffed at the way I cooked for her, muttering that real men didn't belong in the kitchen. He even mocked me for doing laundry, as if helping your wife with chores was some kind of shame. But every time he tried to pull me down, my wife pulled me back up. She would smile at me when he wasn't looking, squeeze my hand under the table, whisper later that she loved the way I treated her. And that, more than anything, made him furious. Because for every harsh word he threw, she gave me double the love. It wasn't long before his irritation turned into open hostility. He started visiting our home uninvited, inspecting things like a landlord. He complained about the furniture, the curtains, even the way I painted the walls. Once, he sneered at the bookshelf I had built myself, saying it looked crooked. My wife adored it. She said it made the house feel alive. And that contrast, the way she praised what he mocked, was gasoline on his fire. I realized something important then. His war wasn't really with me. His war was with himself. But since he couldn't fight himself, he chose me as the battlefield. And I knew it was only a matter of time before the storm broke. The storm didn't roar at first, it whispered. That's the thing about jealousy. It doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it creeps in through small moments that feel harmless until they pile up. One evening, my wife and I were planning a weekend trip. Nothing extravagant, just a little getaway to the countryside. We wanted peace, trees, air that didn't taste like city smoke. She was excited, eyes bright as she searched online for places to stay. She wanted to take pictures by the river, eat at roadside diners, just be with me. Her father happened to call that night. She picked up, smiling as always when she spoke to him. But when she mentioned the trip, his tone shifted. I could hear it even without the speaker on. His voice went cold, sharp. He asked who was paying for it. She said I was. Then came silence, the kind that feels heavy, like thunder before lightning. Later, he showed up at our apartment. No warning, no invitation. He sat on our couch like it belonged to him and began lecturing us about money. He said weekend trips were useless. He said life wasn't about frivolous fun. He said a man should focus on building wealth, not wasting it on rivers and roadside diners. My wife tried to argue, saying it was her life now, her choice. But he looked past her, straight at me, like I was the one pulling her away from his iron grip. I sat quietly, not because I was afraid, but because I understood something. Arguing with him was like shouting at a locked door. The louder you yell, the more ridiculous you look. After he left, my wife collapsed against me, frustrated and exhausted. She whispered that she hated how he still tried to control her. I held her tight and promised her something simple, that our life would be ours, not his. And for a while, that promise carried us. But he wasn't done. He began spreading little seeds of poison. Whispering to relatives that I was too soft, that I pampered her, that I wasn't a real man. Some relatives nodded along, not because they believed him, but because they feared him. That's how control works. Not everyone agrees, but no one dares to disagree. I learned to live with it. Or at least I tried. I focused on my wife, on giving her the love and freedom she deserved. We laughed together, cooked together, built little traditions like Friday night movie marathons with cheap popcorn and mismatched blanket. To us, it was heaven. To him, it was proof that I had stolen something he could never have. And with every smile she gave me, his jealousy sharpened. The breaking point came on a night that should have been one of our happiest. It was my wife's birthday. I had planned everything: balloons, her favorite cake, a small dinner with friends. Nothing fancy, but filled with love. She walked in from work, saw the decorations, and her eyes filled with tears. She hugged me so tight I thought my ribs might crack, and for a moment, I felt invincible. Then the doorbell rang. Her father stood there, holding a gift bag that probably cost more than my entire setup. He walked in without waiting, scanned the decorations, and smirked. He said it looked cute, the way you describe a child's drawing. My wife tried to stay positive, thanking him for coming, but I could feel the air turning heavy. Dinner was tense. He dominated the table, talking about his business, his achievements, his sacrifices. Every time someone complimented the setup, he made a joke that undermined it. When my wife praised the cake I baked, he said it looked homemade, as if that was an insult. The final blow came when she unwrapped his gift. A designer handbag, glossy and expensive. She smiled politely, but I knew her well enough to see the truth. She didn't care about handbags. She cared about the effort, the thought, the heart behind a gift. She reached for my hand under the table, squeezing it softly, as if to say she valued me more than all the price tags in the world. He noticed, and that was it. His face darkened, his jaw tightened, and he slammed his glass down harder than necessary. He made a comment, sharp, cutting, that implied I was turning his daughter against him, that I was brainwashing her with cheap gestures that wouldn't last. The table went silent. Friends shifted uncomfortably. My wife's eyes blazed with anger, but before she could speak, I did. I told him calmly that love isn't measured in price tags. That his daughter deserved happiness, not control. That she was not a child anymore, and I was not his rival, but his partner in caring for her. The words hung in the air like a blade. He stared at me, his face unreadable, then stood and left without another word. The door slammed behind him, shaking the frame. My wife burst into tears, not because of me, but because of the war he had declared. She hated being caught between us. I held her and whispered that no matter what happened, I wasn't backing down. Not from her. Not from the love we had built. That night, as she slept, I stared at the ceiling and realized something chilling. He wasn't just jealous. He was dangerous. Not in the physical sense, but in the way people can destroy relationships from the inside out, like termites eating through wood. Silent, invisible, until everything collapses. And I knew then that this battle was far from over. I wish I could say things cooled down after that birthday disaster, but they didn't. If anything, it was like throwing gasoline on an open fire. My father-in-law didn't yell or fight directly, no, that would have been too easy. He chose a quieter weapon. Whisper campaigns. It started with relatives. Suddenly, uncles and cousins began dropping casual remarks when we met. Comments like how men these days were too soft, too eager to please. How real men were supposed to be tough, even cold, with their wives, so the women respected them properly. I'd smile, pretend I didn't notice, but I knew exactly where those ideas were coming from. Then came the neighbors. One woman in the building told me she'd heard I quit cooking because my wife demanded it. Another neighbor joked that I was house-trained. Funny how gossip grows legs so quickly when someone feeds it. My wife, bless her heart, stood up for me every time. She told anyone who tried to repeat his words that she was happier than ever. She told them I treated her like a queen, not a servant. But I could see the toll it took on her. Defending me meant clashing with her father. And no daughter wants to spend her life caught between love and blood. One evening, after yet another argument sparked by his interference, she broke down. She told me she hated the way he made her feel guilty for being happy. That she loved me, but she didn't know how long she could keep balancing the two worlds. I held her close, whispering that she didn't have to choose, that we would face it together. But inside I was boiling. Because he wasn't just trying to ruin me. He was trying to break her. So I started paying closer attention. Watching his patterns. How he operated. And I realized something. He didn't attack directly. He planted seeds, stepped back, and let them grow wild. He thrived on others doing his dirty work. He wanted to be the puppeteer, pulling strings while pretending his hands were clean. And the more I understood his methods, the more determined I became to cut the strings. The chance came sooner than I expected. It was a family gathering, a cousin's engagement party. Everyone was there, including my father-in-law. He arrived like a general inspecting troops, dressed sharp, chin high, voice booming. He greeted everyone with exaggerated warmth, but when his eyes landed on me, the warmth froze. Dinner was served, laughter filled the room, and for a moment, things felt normal. Then, as if rehearsed, one of the uncles made a joke about how Daniel probably spends more time in the kitchen than his wife. The table erupted in awkward chuckles. My wife's hand tightened on mine under the table. And then, like clockwork, my father-in-law leaned back, smirked, and said something that sliced the air open. He implied that my wife was spoiled. That I was turning her soft. That I was ruining her ability to handle life by pampering her too much. The room went silent. All eyes shifted to me, waiting for me to either crumble or explode. I did neither. I smiled. Calm, steady, almost amused. Then I told a story. I spoke about how my wife worked long hours at her job, how she still came home and smiled, how she supported me in everything I did. I painted her as the strong, incredible woman she was. And then, without raising my voice, I added that if cooking her dinner or holding her hand made me weak, then I hoped to stay weak for the rest of my life. The silence stretched. Then, one by one, people started nodding. Some even clapped softly. My wife's eyes glistened with pride. And for the first time, I saw it, the crack in his armor. He didn't expect me to fight back with words sharper than his. He didn't expect me to turn his insult into a medal of honor. He masked his anger with a forced laugh, but his eyes betrayed him. They burned. He hated me more than ever in that moment, not because I embarrassed him, but because I stole the crowd. His own family saw strength where he wanted them to see weakness. That was my first counterattack. Subtle, clean, but powerful. And as I lay in bed that night, holding my wife close, I realized something important. I couldn't just defend anymore. I had to play offense. Because this wasn't just a clash of personalities. This was war. And wars aren't won by standing still. Silence stopped working for him, so he chose noise. Not the kind you hear from across a room, but the kind that sneaks under doors and rattles the frame. Appointments mysteriously clashed with family obligations he set. Invitations arrived that excluded me by one suspicious seat. Relatives who used to ask about our plans now asked about our problems, as if they already knew the ending and were only checking to see if we had caught up. Then it turned personal. A lease application for a bigger place stalled without reason, even though our documents were clean. Later, a neighbor whispered that a certain elder had raised concerns about my stability, saying I changed jobs too easily and might not sustain rent. I did not change jobs. I worked hard and stayed late and brought work home when I had to. But truth is a slow runner when gossip rides a motorcycle. He called my wife more often. Not to ask how she was, but to measure how tightly I held her hand. He framed it as care, but care does not come with an audit sheet. He hinted that she was losing herself, that comfort would ruin her backbone, that a soft home breeds a weak marriage. She cried in the kitchen and wiped her tears with the back of her hand, like she had done that 1,000 times in another life. I wanted to march to his door and shake the house until the bricks remembered respect. Instead, I held her and planned. I started keeping a simple log. Dates, actions, outcomes. Uninvited visits, sudden schedule clashes, messages that pushed guilt like a sales pitch. Not for court, not yet. For clarity. Because fog wins when you forget how you got lost. The log gave me shape. The shape gave me spine. He tried to turn my work into a stage. A client dinner turned into a family ambush when 2 uncles arrived early and sat near the entrance, ready to judge the way I greeted guests and poured water. Another evening, he phoned my supervisor under the cover of guidance, suggesting I looked tired and might need lighter responsibilities. I found out when my supervisor asked if everything at home was calm. Calm is not a word I could use with a straight face. But I learned the right response. I said the home was strong, the work was strong, and both would stay strong. Then I doubled the value I delivered and let results answer questions I could not. At night, my wife and I rebuilt our island. We ate on the floor when the day felt too heavy for chairs. We wrote dreams on sticky notes and posted them on the fridge, where Bills used to live alone. We walked at dusk and spoke gently and refused to let bitterness learn our names. On the worst days, we practiced the quiet art of being on the same team. No grand speeches. Just small choices that said you first, then me, then us. The more he pushed, the more I noticed a pattern. His control needed an audience. Without an audience, he only had his own echo. So I began starving the echo. I stopped attending small skirmishes disguised as dinners. I declined last-minute invitations that were clearly designed to put me in a corner. I returned calls at hours that suited our life, not his agenda. I set a single rule and repeated it like a prayer. Our home is our boundary. Respect it and you can visit. Disrespect it and you can remember it from the street. The rule did not change him. It changed us. We slept better. We laughed louder. My wife started to see that her peace mattered more than his pride. She began answering him with calm delays instead of rushed fear. A new rhythm took root. He noticed. Jealousy, when it cannot win the heart, will try to win the crowd. So he planned bigger. A family anniversary celebration approached, the kind that gathers every branch and root. He booked the hall himself, curated the program, and placed himself as master of ceremonies. The invitation came with my name written in neat letters that felt like a dare. He wanted a stage and a target in the same room. I accepted, not because I loved the show, but because some storms are best met in the open where everyone can feel the wind. I did not plan a fight. I prepared a mirror. The hall gleamed like a promise. Chandeliers pretended to be stars. Tables dressed in white waited for stories to spill on them. He stood at the entrance greeting guests with a smile that looked carved from marble. When we arrived, his eyes scanned me head to toe, then softened for my wife as if I was a shadow that had wandered into the light by mistake. Speeches began with history and respect. He spoke of discipline and sacrifice, of building a family with 2 hands and a stern mind. People nodded. Some even dabbed their eyes. He loved that part, the part where memory forgets the cost. Then came the slideshow. Photos of birthdays with staged cake, trips where laughter looked tired, awards that glittered like medals for enduring silence. He paused often on pictures of his daughter as a child, freezing her in time, as if keeping her small made him large. I watched my wife watch her younger self. Pride, then sadness, then a kind of relief that looked like air after a long dive. She slipped her fingers into mine beneath the table, and for a quiet moment, we existed alone in a room full of noise. Then it began. He shifted the program into tribute. Guests took turns praising him. Some praise was honest. Some was obligation dressed as respect. When a cousin thanked him for being a father figure to everyone, he beamed with the joy of a king who had counted his coins twice. Finally, he invited me up. The tone in his voice was honey with a blade under it. I stood at the front and spoke about gratitude. Not to flatter him, not to taunt him. To reframe the room. I thanked the elders for the roads they built. I thanked the mothers for the love that did not need microphones. I thanked the younger ones for daring to want gentle homes and stronger hearts. I spoke of partnership, of how a marriage thrives when kindness is not rationed. I described a house where chores were not punishments but gifts, where affection was not a weakness but a language. I did not mention names. I did not point fingers. I painted a picture and let people decide who lived in it. The room listened. The silence felt awake, not empty. I closed with a small toast to the future, to daughters who are cherished and sons who are taught tenderness without shame. A wave of soft applause moved through the hall like a tide. My wife's eyes shone. He clapped slowly, expression unreadable, the kind of slow clap that says the game has changed. He took back the microphone and tried to steer the ship. He called for tradition. He spoke about the dangers of comfort, about how too much love can spoil a person. The word spoil landed like a dropped plate. People heard it. People looked at their plates. An aunt who never liked to speak raised her hand and told a short story about how she found joy late in life, when her husband learned to listen more and command less. A cousin mentioned therapy in a respectful tone that would have been unthinkable a few years ago. The tide had a mind of its own. He pivoted to humor, made a jab about modern men who cook more than they fix cars. Laughter came, but it sounded thin, like paper trying to sound like drum. I smiled and let the joke pass. Jokes only sting when you grant them truth. Then came the moment I had prepared for without telling anyone. The host announced a surprise segment to honor the women of the family. Not his idea, but the committee's. A video rolled with quiet piano and simple words from daughters, nieces, sisters. They spoke about small acts of love that made them feel safe. Someone mentioned warm tea at midnight. Someone mentioned a ride to a job interview without lectures attached. Then my wife appeared. She talked about a home where she could finally breathe, where she felt seen without fear, where love did not come with a report card. She did not mention me by name. She did not need to. The room understood. The camera cut back to the hall. Eyes were wet. Egos, not so much. He stood still, smile fading by millimeters. He tried to save face with a closing remark, but the wind had shifted. The applause that followed the women's segment was not polite. It was grateful. It was relief. It was truth finally getting the microphone. After the program, guests mingled. A few uncles who once teased me about aprons now asked for recipes and laughed at themselves without shame. An aunt squeezed my hand and whispered that strength has many shapes. My supervisor, who had been invited by a cousin, shook my hand and said the word integrity in a way that felt like a promotion waiting for the right day. He approached last. No rage, no scene. Just a stare that measured losses. He said nothing. Silence can be a threat or a lesson. I treated it like weather and walked my wife to the door. Outside, the night felt honest again. We stood under the weak light of the portico while the driver pulled around. My wife leaned into me with a relief that tasted like sweet tea after a long fast. She said we were turning a page. I said the book finally remembered its hero. She laughed, the kind of laugh that makes time stop apologizing. The mirror had done its work. It did not shame him. It removed his hiding place. The crowd he needed to validate control had seen another way to live. Once people see gentleness standing tall, the old fear shrinks to its true size. I knew he would not surrender. Control rarely retires, it regrouped. But the ground had shifted, and this time, it shifted under his shoes, not ours. The climax was close. I could feel it in the quiet between our breaths, in the way my phone stayed still in my pocket, in the fresh certainty that love wins when it refuses to play the old game. The weeks after the anniversary party felt different. Quieter. Lighter. My wife and I noticed it first in the little things. Fewer calls that ended in tears. Less pressure to attend every family dinner. More cousins reaching out directly to us instead of through him. It was as if the mirror in that hall hadn't just exposed him, it freed others too. But quiet doesn't mean surrender. Quiet often means regrouping. One evening, he showed up at our apartment unannounced again. This time, no polite knock. He walked in like the walls still belonged to him. My wife stiffened beside me, her smile fading. I offered him tea, not out of kindness, but as a way of saying this was our home, and we set the tone here. He declined, pacing the room like a general before a speech. He launched into a monologue about tradition, duty, and the fragility of modern marriages. He accused me, indirectly but sharply, of brainwashing his daughter. He claimed I had stolen her respect, turned her into someone he barely recognized. For the first time, my wife didn't stay silent. She stood. Her voice didn't shake. She told him she wasn't stolen, she was loved. That she wasn't weaker, she was stronger. That his jealousy wasn't protecting her, it was poisoning her. The room fell silent. His face turned red, but he couldn't find words. Because the truth, once spoken aloud, doesn't leave much room for denial. He looked at me then, eyes blazing, and I realized something. I wasn't his rival anymore. I was his replacement. Not in role, but in impact. He had spent years demanding respect. I had earned it in months with nothing more than care. He stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. But this time, my wife didn't cry. She exhaled. She leaned into me and whispered that she finally felt free. That night, I wrote the last line in my log. He lost, not because I fought harder, but because I loved better. Life didn't magically turn perfect after that. There were still calls, still whispers, still little tests. But they no longer had power. We had learned the secret: jealousy only wins when you give it space to live. And we stopped feeding it. Our home became a sanctuary. We filled it with laughter, burnt pancakes, half-finished puzzles, late-night talks that stretched until dawn. We built routines that looked ordinary but felt extraordinary: Friday movie nights, Sunday morning walks, silly inside jokes that belonged only to us. My father-in-law remained in the background, a shadow that sometimes flickered at the edge of our lives. But shadows can't hurt you when you've learned to walk in the light. I realized then that revenge doesn't always come as fire and fury. Sometimes it comes as peace. Sometimes the best revenge is living so well that those who tried to break you are forced to watch you thrive. Today, when I look at my wife smiling across the table, I don't think about the battles we fought. I think about how every scar turned into a shield, how every tear watered the roots of a love that no storm could uproot. And my father-in-law? He may never admit defeat. He may never accept that I gave his daughter the love he couldn't. But deep down, he knows. And that knowledge is its own punishment. Because in the end, I didn't just win her heart, I gave her a life where she could finally breathe. And nothing he does can take that away. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel. That's free and only way to support us. Thank you.